The gentle hum of Kale's atmospheric analyzer provided the only familiar sound in the alien wilderness of Xylos. He adjusted the device's settings, watching as light patterns danced across its small display, telling a story of chemical imbalance and deterioration that matched what his eyes could already see. All around him, the bioluminescent forest was dimming, its once vibrant blues and purples now muted, some patches darkened completely to a lifeless black. Third sector showing the same degradation patterns. He muttered into his recorder, sliding the analyzer back into his pack. Soil toxicity increased another 18% since last month's reading. The withering is accelerating. Kale had been on Xylos for 8 months now, sent as an independent ecological surveyor after larger corporate research teams had abandoned the planet. His mission was simple on paper: document the mysterious biological degradation spreading across the planet's ecosystems and determine if it had any connection to humanity's failed terraforming attempt nearly a century ago. In reality, the task was monumentally complex and increasingly dangerous as the planet's delicate balance continued to unravel. He stopped to take a drink from his canteen, using the moment to scan his surroundings. Something didn't feel right. The tiny hairs on the back of his neck stood up, a primitive warning system that had saved his life more than once on this unpredictable world. There it was again, the almost imperceptible rustle of movement from somewhere above in the luminous canopy. Too deliberate for the wind, too careful for one of the larger predator species he'd documented. Kale slowly lowered his pack to the ground and reached for his stunner, keeping his movements casual, unhurried. His eyes caught something else, a slender vine stretched taut across the path ahead, positioned at ankle height. It hadn't been there when he'd passed through this section yesterday. The placement was too precise, too intentional. A trap. Interesting, he whispered, kneeling to examine it without touching. Someone's hunting. The stories among the few human outposts that remained on Xylos spoke of the forest ghost, a native predator of uncanny intelligence that left no tracks, made no sound, and was never seen until it was too late. Most dismissed it as exaggerated campfire tales, the kind that inevitably emerged on frontier worlds. Kale had been more skeptical than most, until now. A soft crackle from his comm unit broke the silence. Atmospheric interference again, scrambling what little connection he had to his base camp. He needed to head back soon before the magnetic storm intensified, and something sharp pierced his shoulder. Kale spun around, stunner raised, but his attacker was already gone. A projectile, some kind of organic dart, protruded from his shoulder. He yanked it out, examining the barbed tip glistening with a clear substance. Poison. His vision swam momentarily, and he staggered, leaning against a bioluminescent trunk for support. The forest around him pulsed with light in response to his touch, illuminating the clearing. And that's when he saw her. She dropped from the canopy, landing with impossible grace on the forest floor, a humanoid figure slightly shorter than himself, with skin the color of pale jade veined with luminous patterns that matched the forest glow. Her features were sharp, predatory, with eyes so deeply green they appeared almost black in the dim light. Her body was covered in what appeared to be a combination of some kind of organic armor and sparse clothing made from materials he couldn't identify. Not a ghost. A native. Kale had been told Xylos was uninhabited by sentient species, that any indigenous intelligent life had died out long before humans had discovered the planet. Clearly, someone had been very, very wrong. The native approached with predatory confidence, moving in a fluid, almost hypnotic pattern that made it difficult for Kale to track her moments. The toxin was beginning to affect his coordination. His finger fumbled with the stunner's trigger, but before he could aim, she had closed the distance between them. With a swift strike, she knocked the weapon from his hand. Kale attempted to defend himself, but his movements were sluggish, his limbs increasingly unresponsive. The native easily evaded his clumsy counterattack and swept his legs from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. In seconds, she had him pinned, one knee pressing into his chest. Up close, her features were even more striking. High cheekbones, a delicate nose, and lips pulled back to reveal sharp, elongated canines. She studied him with an expression of cold curiosity, like a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. Then she leaned down, her face inches from his, and spoke in a language of clicks and musical tones that his translator couldn't begin to decipher. "Well, he didn't respond," she grasped, his jaw turning his head to the side to expose his neck. Kale struggled against her grip, but the toxin had rendered him too weak to resist effectively. He felt her breath against his skin, then a sharp, searing pain as her teeth pierced his flesh. The pain was immediate and intense, spreading like liquid fire from the bite through his entire body. Kale gasped, expecting paralysis, unconsciousness, or worse. Instead, the burning sensation transformed, becoming something else entirely. A wave of heat and energy that coursed through his veins, heightening every sense. Colors intensified, sounds sharpened. Even the scent of the alien forest became richer, more complex. Above him, the native made a startled sound and pulled back abruptly. Her eyes had widened, pupils dilating as she stared at him in obvious shock. She touched her lips, then looked at her fingertips as if expecting to see something there. She spoke again, her voice taking on a different cadence, questioning, confused. She leaned closer, sniffing at the wound she'd made, her expression a mixture of disbelief and fascination. Kale attempted to speak, to ask what was happening, but the strange energy surging through him made it difficult to form coherent thoughts. The native's expression shifted from confusion to something more calculating. She reached for something at her belt, a small container of some kind, and pressed it against his neck, collecting a sample of his blood. The last thing Kale saw before unconsciousness claimed him was the native holding the container up to the bioluminescent light, staring at its contents with an expression of wonder and dawning hunger. Kale awoke to pain throbbing in his neck and the disorienting sensation of being suspended above the ground. His eyes fluttered open to a world of filtered blue-green light and swaying shadows. It took several moments for his vision to focus and his mind to process his surroundings. He was inside, some kind of structure built high among the massive trees of Xylos. The walls formed from a combination of living branches, woven vines, and what appeared to be translucent membranes that allowed the bioluminescent glow of the forest to filter through. The space was surprisingly large and complex, not a simple shelter, but a dwelling crafted with care and intelligence. His arms and legs were bound with fibrous vines that yielded slightly to pressure, but refused to break. He tested their strength carefully, trying not to signal that he was awake. "You are conscious. Do not pretend." The voice came from behind him, speaking in heavily accented but understandable English. Kale turned his head to see the native woman watching him from the opposite side of the dwelling. She sat cross-legged on what appeared to be a woven mat, her posture alert, tense. "You speak my language," Kale said, his voice rough from dehydration. "I learned from the others, the ones who came before." She rose in one fluid motion and approached, stopping just beyond his reach. "You are human, but different." "What? Different how?" Kale asked, genuinely confused. Instead of answering, she retrieved a container similar to the one she'd used to collect his blood. Beside it sat several others, each containing different colored liquids. "Your blood," she said, holding up the container filled with his blood sample. "It does not sleep. All others sleep when I bite." She gestured to the other containers. "These sleep forever. You do not." Understanding dawned on Kale. "My blood didn't react to your venom," he said. "That's what you mean." She tilted her head, considering the translation. "Venom. Yes. My venom makes all sleep. All but you." She stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the bite mark on his neck. "Why? I don't know," Kale answered honestly. "Human biology must be different from other species on this planet. We're not native to Xylos." "Xylos," she repeated, as if testing the name. "We call it Sylvath, the living world." She touched her chest. "I am Lyra." "I'm Kale," he replied, surprised by this development. "Will you untie me now?" Lyra's expression hardened. "No, you are dangerous." Humans bring the dying. The withering. The withering, Kale repeated. That's what you call it? The forest dying? Lyra nodded, her luminous patterns briefly intensifying with what might have been emotion. It spreads, kills everything. My people. She gestured out toward the forest. Few remain. I'm here to study it, Kale explained, trying to keep his voice calm, reasonable, to find out what's causing it and how to stop it. I'm not here to harm your world. Lyra studied him, skepticism evident in her expression. Then, without warning, she moved closer and leaned down, her face near the bite mark on his neck. Kale tensed, expecting another attack, but instead, she inhaled deeply, as if catching his scent. You smell of truth, she said finally, but also of the machines that poison. My equipment is for analysis only. Kale insisted, to understand what's happening. Lyra's hand moved to her side, where a crude water container hung. She brought it to Kale's lips, allowing him to drink. The water had a sweet, mineral taste unlike anything on Earth. After he'd drunk his fill, she set it aside and retrieved something that resembled fruit, offering him a piece. Eat, she said. Then we talk more. Kale accepted the food cautiously. It had a texture like mango, but tasted like nothing he'd experienced before, tangy and sweet with an undertone of something almost spicy. As he ate, he noticed Lyra watching him with uncomfortable intensity, her eyes repeatedly drawn to his neck. When he finished eating, Lyra approached again, this time with what appeared to be a crude drawing implement and a flat piece of bark. She made several quick sketches, simple representations of humans, trees, and what appeared to be machines. Humans came, she said, pointing to the figures. Built these. She indicated the machines. Then this. Her finger traced a pattern spreading from the machines to the trees, which were drawn progressively more withered. You think human technology is causing the withering? Kale asked. Lyra nodded. The poison spreads from the metal hearts. Where they're strongest, death comes fastest. Metal hearts, processing stations, or terraforming equipment, possibly. It aligned with Kale's own hypothesis that the abandoned terraforming project had left behind malfunctioning systems slowly poisoning the planet. I believe you're right, Kale said, and I want to help stop it. Lyra's eyes narrowed suspiciously. Why would human help? Because this is wrong, Kale said simply. My people made a mistake here. Not all humans are the same, Lyra. Some of us want to protect worlds, not exploit them. She seemed to consider this, then abruptly stood and moved closer. Before Kale could react, she leaned down and sank her teeth into his shoulder, just below his collarbone. Pain lanced through him again, followed by that same strange rush of energy. But this time, he was conscious enough to observe Lyra's reaction as she pulled away. Her pupils dilated dramatically, and the luminous patterns on her skin brightened and pulsed rapidly. She staggered back slightly, her breathing quickened, and for a moment, her expression was one of pure ecstasy. What? Kale gasped as the sensation coursed through his system. What are you doing? Lyra didn't answer immediately. She pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with what appeared to be shock and perhaps shame. When she finally spoke, her voice had a slight tremor. Your blood, it wakes something in me. Gives strength, clarity. She turned away, visibly struggling to compose herself. Never felt before. With no other. Kale realized with growing alarm what was happening. My blood affects you. Like a drug. Lyra nodded slowly, not meeting his eyes. I must think. You stay. She moved quickly to the entrance of the dwelling and disappeared, leaving Kale alone with the disturbing realization that he wasn't just a prisoner. He was becoming an addiction. Hours passed before Lyra returned. When she did, her demeanor had changed. The predatory confidence had been replaced by a tightly controlled tension. She moved around the dwelling with deliberate care, maintaining distance from Kale. She carried what appeared to be a damaged electronic device, one of Kale's own portable analyzers that had been in his pack. This speaks, she asked, setting it down where he could see it. It's an atmospheric analyzer, Kale explained. It measures chemicals, toxins, energy patterns. It finds the poison? Lyra asked, interest evident in her voice. Yes, it can detect many types of environmental toxins, Kale confirmed. If you untime me, I can show you how it works. I can use it to help locate the source of the withering. Lyra hesitated, clearly torn between distrust and need. Finally, she approached and began loosening the vines binding his wrists. Try to escape, she warned, and I will hunt you. No, one escapes Lyra in the forest. As the bindings fell away, Kale slowly sat up, massaging his wrist to restore circulation. His legs remained bound, preventing him from standing, but it was a start. Thank you, he said, reaching for the analyzer. May I? Lyra pushed it toward him, watching his every move. Kale activated the device, relieved to find it still functional despite some damage to its casing. The display flickered to life, showing the most recent atmospheric readings he'd taken. See these patterns? He explained, pointing to the screen. They indicate high levels of metallic particulates and synthetic compounds that don't belong in a natural environment. They're consistent with degraded terraforming chemicals. Lyra leaned closer to see, her proximity making Kale acutely aware of the predator beside him. Her scent was unusual, something like crushed leaves and ozone after lightning. He noticed her gaze drifting to his neck again, and he instinctively reached up to touch the bite mark. Does it hurt still? She asked, her voice softer than before. A little, Kale admitted. What exactly does your venom do to the species here? It makes the body sleep while mine stays awake, Lyra explained. For hunting, for defense. She gestured to the forest beyond the dwelling. All creatures of Sylvith feel the bite and cannot move. Some die if I wish it. Her eyes fixed on his neck again. But you feel different. You burn instead of sleep. And my blood affects you differently too, Kale observed cautiously. Lyra's luminous patterns flickered, a reaction he was beginning to associate with emotional response. It makes me see clearer, feel stronger, like the forest before the dying came. She moved away abruptly. It is dangerous. Makes me want more. An addiction, Kale said. My blood triggers some kind of neurochemical reaction in your system. What is this? Addiction? Lyra asked, testing the unfamiliar word. It's when your body begins to crave something, need it, Kale explained. The more you have it, the more you want it, until it becomes difficult to function without it. Lyra's expression darkened, like the metal poison that the forest cannot live without now. It changes everything it touches. She looked at him accusingly. Your blood is another human poison. Not exactly, Kale said quickly. It's a natural compatibility issue between species. Neither of us knew this would happen. Lyra seemed unconvinced but didn't pursue the argument. Instead, she retrieved a small clay container filled with a greenish paste. For the bite, she said, offering it to him. We'll heal. Kale accepted the ointment and applied it to the bite marks. It had an immediate cooling effect, soothing the lingering burn. Thank you, he said. This helps. As night fell, the bioluminescence of the forest intensified, bathing the dwelling in ethereal blue-green light. Lyra provided more food and water, then settled on her woven mat across the room, her back against the wall where she could watch him. Despite her obvious fatigue, she seemed determined to remain vigilant. You should sleep, Kale suggested. I'm not going anywhere with my legs still tied. Sylvani do not need sleep like humans, she replied, though her drooping eyelids suggested otherwise. Sylvani, Kale repeated. That's your people? Lyra nodded. We are the first children of Sylvith. Few remain now. A shadow passed over her features. The withering takes them too. How long has it been happening? Kale asked, genuinely interested in gathering more data. It began before my birth, Lyra said. Slowly at first. Trees lost light. Animals grew sick. Now it spreads faster each season. She gestured to the luminous patterns on her skin, which Kale noticed seemed fainter than before. Even our light dims. The significance of her words struck Kale. The Sylvani weren't just inhabitants of this ecosystem. They were biologically integrated with it. The same toxins killing the forest were killing them too. I want to help, Kale said, with renewed conviction. My research, my equipment, I came here to understand the withering. With your knowledge of the forest and my scientific analysis, we might be able to find its source and stop it. Lyra studied him for a long moment. Why would human help Silvani? Because it's the right thing to do, Kale said simply. And because I've seen enough worlds damaged by human carelessness. I don't want Xylo's Sylvith to be another one. His sincerity seemed to reach her. She nodded slowly. Rest now. Tomorrow we begin. As Lyra finally succumbed to exhaustion, her head dropping forward in sleep, Kale considered his situation. He was still a prisoner, technically, but also potentially a lifeline for a dying species on a dying world. And somehow, his blood had formed an unexpected bond, or dangerous addiction, with his captor. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time since arriving on this planet, Kale felt he might actually have a chance to make a difference. Dawn on Xylos brought a misty luminescence as the forest's bioluminescence interacted with the first light of the planet's sun. Kale awoke to find Lyra already active, preparing what appeared to be equipment for a journey. She had assembled a collection of containers, weapons, and tools. We go to the dying heart, she announced when she saw he was awake. You will bring your machines that speak of poison. You're taking me to the source of the withering? Kale asked, surprised by this sudden decision. Lyra nodded, approaching to untie his legs. I watched you sleep. You spoke truth about helping. I feel it. She tapped her chest. Silvani know truth speakers. As the bindings fell away, Kale carefully stood, his muscles protesting after hours of inactivity. Lyra handed him his pack, which she had apparently retrieved from where. He dropped it during their encounter. Most of his equipment was still inside, though some items had been removed for examination. Thank you, he said, checking his analyzers and sample collection tools. We'll need to take readings as we travel. The concentration of toxins should increase as we get closer to the source. Lyra handed him a piece of fruit for breakfast. Eat. Need strength. She watched him consume it quickly, then gestured to the dwelling's entrance. We travel far. Many dangers. The descent from Lyra's arboreal home was dizzying. The structure was built higher in the canopy than Kale had realized, integrated so seamlessly with the massive trees that it was nearly invisible from below. Lyra moved with natural grace along branches and makeshift bridges, occasionally having to guide Kale when the path became too precarious for his less adapted human reflexes. Once on the forest floor, Kale activated his primary analyzer and began taking readings. The concentrations are already higher than in the areas I've surveyed before, he noted, studying the display. Which direction is the dying heart? Lyra pointed toward a distant section of the forest where the bioluminescence was noticeably dimmer. 3 days' journey. The dead zone grows larger each season. They set off at a pace that challenged Kale's endurance. Lyra moved through the forest with the easy confidence of someone navigating their home, while Kale had to carefully watch his footing on the uneven, root-covered ground. Every hour, he stopped briefly to take new readings, confirming that the concentration of metallic particulates was indeed increasing as they progressed. By midday, they had reached a small stream. The water flowed sluggishly, its surface occasionally breaking with iridescent bubbles that burst with soft pops. Lyra knelt at the water's edge, frowning. This was clear last season, she said, dipping her fingers into the water and then sniffing them. Now it carries sickness. Kale took a sample, analyzing it with his portable equipment. High concentrations of heavy metals and synthetic compounds, he confirmed, consistent with degraded terraforming chemicals. What is this? Terraforming? Lyra asked, pronouncing the unfamiliar word carefully. It's a process humans use to make planets more like Earth, our homeworld, Kale explained. They tried to terraform Xylos nearly a century ago, but the project was abandoned. My theory is that the equipment they left behind has degraded over time, leaking chemicals and altering the ecosystem in ways they never intended. Lyra's expression darkened. Humans try to make Sylvith into something else? Something not itself? Yes, Kale admitted, seeing no point in lying. It was wrong. Many of us understand that now, but the damage was already done. They continued their journey in tense silence, with Lyra maintaining a greater distance from Kale than before. The revelation about terraforming seemed to have rekindled her distrust, and Kale couldn't blame her. Humans had attempted to fundamentally rewrite her world's nature, a violation that went beyond mere exploitation. As the day progressed, the forest around them changed subtly but unmistakably. The bioluminescence grew dimmer, patches of vegetation appeared withered or discolored, and wildlife became scarcer. The air took on a metallic taste that coated the back of Kale's throat and made his eyes sting slightly. By late afternoon, Lyra suddenly froze, raising her hand for Kale to stop. Her head tilted, listening to something beyond human hearing range. In one fluid motion, she knocked an arrow to her bow, which Kale realized was made from materials similar to those that comprised her dwelling, part organic, part synthesized. "What is it?" Kale whispered. "Rotwalker," Lyra whispered back, her voice barely audible. "Corrupted by the poison. Once was forest keeper." Before Kale could ask for clarification, the undergrowth ahead erupted as a massive creature charged toward them. It vaguely resembled a six-legged herbivore, but its form was grotesquely altered, flesh mottled with patches of crystalline growth, eyes clouded and seeping fluid, movements jerky and unnatural. Lyra's arrow flew true, striking the creature in what should have been a vital area, but it barely slowed. She fired again, simultaneously moving to position herself between the beast and Kale. "Your venom," Kale called out. "Can you use it?" "Poison has no effect on corrupted ones," Lyra responded grimly, firing a third arrow. The creature was upon them now. Lyra dodged its charge with inhuman agility, but Kale wasn't fast enough. One crystalline-encrusted limb caught him a glancing blow, sending him sprawling to the ground. The Rotwalker turned, focusing on the easier prey, and charged again. Kale rolled desperately to avoid being trampled, fumbling for his stunner. He managed to activate it and fire as the creature loomed over him. The electrical discharge hit the Rotwalker directly, causing it to convulse momentarily, but not stopping its advance. Suddenly Lyra was there, launching herself onto the creature's back. With a swift, practiced movement, she drove what appeared to be a bone knife deep into the base of the Rotwalker's skull, twisting with all her strength. The creature shuddered, emitted a high-pitched keening sound, and collapsed. Its crystalline growths pulsed with sickly light for several moments before fading. Lyra stepped back from the carcass, breathing heavily. "Are you injured?" she asked, turning to Kale. "Just bruised," he replied, wincing as he got to his feet. "What was that thing?" "Once was Hariti, gentle plant eater," Lyra explained, cleaning her blade on a patch of moss. "The poison changes them, drives them mad with pain until they attack anything that moves." She gestured to the crystalline growths. The poison grows inside them, becomes part of them. Kale approached the fallen creature cautiously, scanner in hand. The readings were alarming, toxic concentrations far higher than in the surrounding environment, with evidence of cellular mutation and mineral accretion. The creature had essentially become a living repository for the terraforming chemicals, its biology warped to incorporate the foreign elements. "It's bioaccumulation," Kale murmured. "The toxins build up in the organism over time until they reach lethal levels and cause mutations." He looked up at Lyra. "How common are these Rotwalkers?" "More each season," she replied grimly. "All creatures touched by the poison eventually become corrupted, some faster than others." She glanced down at her own arms, where the luminous patterns seemed to pulse erratically. Even Sylvani. The implication struck Kale like a physical blow. The Sylvani weren't just dying alongside their ecosystem. They were at risk of being corrupted by the same toxins, transformed into something monstrous like the creature they just killed. "We need to move," Lyra said, interrupting his thoughts. "Blood draws more hunters." Not safe. They traveled until dusk, pushing deeper into the increasingly sick forest. When they finally stopped to make camp, Lyra selected a massive hollow tree trunk, its interior large enough to shelter them both. "We rest here," she declared, arranging bioluminescent fungi to provide light. "I will keep watch first." Kale set up his equipment to analyze the day's samples, hoping to find patterns that might help pinpoint the exact source of the contamination. As he worked, he became acutely aware of Lyra watching him from across their small shelter. Her gaze had that same hungry intensity he'd noticed in her dwelling. "The bite marks," she said eventually, breaking the silence. "How do they feel now?" Kale touched his neck self-consciously. "They're healing, I think. Still sensitive." Lyra moved closer, her movements hesitant, almost against her will. "The forest grows darker. My strength dims with it." Her voice lowered. "Your blood gives clarity, strength." Understanding dawned on Kale. "You're going through withdrawal," he realized. "Your body is craving whatever chemical reaction my blood triggered." "I fight it," Lyra insisted, though her gaze remained fixed on his neck. "But as we near the dying heart, I need strength to protect us both." Kale considered the situation. If Lyra was physically weakening as they approached the source of the withering, that posed a danger to them both. At the same time, feeding her addiction seemed like a slippery slope. "How about a compromise?" he suggested carefully. "If we face danger, or if you need strength to get us past obstacles, you can take a small amount. Just enough to help, not enough to deepen the addiction." Lyra nodded, relief evident in her expression. "I will not take without need or permission," she promised. "This I swear by the old light." They settled into an uneasy rest, taking turns keeping watch. During his shift, Kale found himself studying Lyra as she slept. The luminous patterns on her skin pulsed in rhythm with her breathing, sometimes brightening when she shifted position. She was undeniably alien, yet there was something hauntingly beautiful about her, a living embodiment of the unique biology of this world, a world that humanity had carelessly tried to rewrite, and in failing, left to die a slow, poisoned death. Kale renewed his silent promise to help save this planet, not just as atonement for humanity's mistakes, but because worlds like Xylos, unique, complex, irreplaceable, deserve to exist on their own terms. The second day of travel brought them into terrain that barely resembled the vibrant forest Kale had first encountered on Xylos. The massive trees still stood, but many were dormant or dying, their bioluminescence reduced to faint, sporadic pulses. The undergrowth had thinned dramatically, replaced by patches of crystalline formations similar to those on the Rotwalker, but sprouting directly from his soil. "The poison grows like plants now," Lyra explained, carefully navigating around a cluster of sharp, iridescent crystals. "Takes the light to make its own wrong light." Kale's analyzers confirmed her observation. The crystalline structures were actually concentrating and processing the terraforming chemicals, creating secondary compounds that further accelerated the ecosystem's degradation. It was like watching a cancer metastasize across an entire planet. By midday, they encountered their first major obstacle, a ravine cutting across their path, too wide to jump and too deep to safely descend. What might once have been a natural formation had been transformed by the withering. The sides of the ravine glistened with metallic residue, and at its bottom flowed not water, but a viscous, silvery liquid that occasionally bubbled and released plumes of noxious vapor. "Liquid poison," Lyra said grimly. "We must find another way." They traveled along the edge of the ravine for nearly an hour before finding a possible crossing, the fallen trunk of a massive tree stretching from one side to the other. But the trunk itself had been affected by the toxins, its surface partially crystallized and unstable looking. Lyra tested it cautiously with one foot, wincing as sharp crystal formations cut into her skin. "Not safe," she determined. But no other way. Kale examined the crystalline growths with his scanner. "They're brittle," he observed. "Maybe we can break them off, clear a path across." With Kale's stunner and Lyra's bone knife, they began carefully removing the worst of the crystal formations, creating a precarious but passable route across the massive trunk. The work was slow and dangerous, with each broken crystal releasing small puffs of metallic dust that made them cough and their eyes water. Halfway through the task, Lyra suddenly staggered, dropping her knife. It clattered down the side of the ravine, and disappeared into the silvery flow below. Lyra, Kale moved quickly to steady her, alarmed by the sudden pallor of her skin. The luminous patterns had dimmed dramatically, pulsing erratically. The poison air, she gasped, affects Silvani faster than humans. She leaned heavily against him, her breathing labored. Need, strength. Kale understood immediately. He guided her to a relatively clear section of the trunk and sat down, pulling her down beside him. Without hesitation, he tilted his head, exposing his neck where she had bitten him before. "Take what you need," he said, "just enough to get us across." Lyra's eyes, dulled by the toxins, briefly flashed with hunger and gratitude. She leaned forward, her movements still weak, and sank her teeth into the partially healed wound on his neck. The familiar pain lanced through Kale, followed by the wave of heat and heightened senses. He felt his heart rate increase. His vision sharpened until every detail of the sick forest around them stood out in stark relief. For Lyra, the effect was more dramatic. The luminous patterns on her skin suddenly brightened, pulsing with renewed vigor. She pulled back from his neck, her pupils dilated, breathing rapid. Color returned to her complexion, and the trembling in her limbs ceased. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice stronger. "I can continue now." They resumed, clearing the crossing, now working faster with Lyra's restored strength. When the path was as clear as they could make it, Lyra went first, moving with the grace and confidence that had momentarily abandoned her. Kale followed more cautiously, keeping his eyes fixed on the path ahead rather than the toxic flow far below. They had nearly reached the far side when disaster struck. A section of the trunk, weakened by the toxic crystals, suddenly gave way beneath Kale's foot. He lurched sideways, barely catching himself before he plunged into the ravine. His fingers dug desperately into the rotting wood, finding minimal purchase. For a terrifying moment, he hung suspended over the toxic flow, feeling the trunk continue to crumble beneath his grip. "Kale!" Lyra's voice cut through his panic. She had already reached the far side, but now turned back, dropping to her stomach and extending her arm toward him. "Take my hand." Kale reached up with one hand, his other still clinging to the disintegrating trunk. Their fingers brushed, missed, then connected. Lyra's grip was astonishingly strong as she pulled him upward, leveraging her body to counterbalance his weight. With a final surge of effort, she hauled him onto solid ground, both of them collapsing onto the ravine's edge, breathing heavily. "That was too close," Kale gasped, looking back at the trunk that now had a gaping hole where he had been standing moments before. Lyra nodded, still catching her breath. "Your blood gave me strength to pull you," she said, looking at her hand still intertwined with his. "Without it, we both would be lost." They remained there briefly, recovering from the ordeal before continuing their journey. As they progressed deeper into the affected territory, the devastation became increasingly profound. Entire groves of trees stood lifeless, their once luminous trunks now dark and brittle. The ground beneath their feet had changed texture, becoming metallic in patches, crunching unnaturally with each step. Wildlife had all but disappeared, save for occasional glimpses of corrupted creatures, smaller versions of the rotwalker they had encountered earlier, moving with the same jerky, unnatural motions. These creatures avoided them, perhaps recognizing Lyra as a predator or perhaps too far gone in their corruption to register their presence at all. As dusk approached, bringing no significant change in light within the dead forest, Lyra led them to what appeared to be a small cave formed by the upturned roots of a fallen giant tree. "We rest here," she decided, checking the space carefully before allowing Kale to enter. "Tomorrow we reach the dying heart." Inside the makeshift shelter, Kale set up his equipment to analyze the day's samples. The readings were alarming. Toxin levels had increased exponentially since morning, and the chemical signatures were becoming more complex, suggesting the terraforming compounds were continuing to mutate and evolve. "The poison changes itself," Lyra observed, watching the data scroll across his screen. "Becomes smarter." "Not exactly smarter," Kale explained, But the chemicals are reacting with the environment in ways the terraformers never anticipated. They're forming new compounds, catalyzed by the unique biology of Xylos. He turned to face her. Lyra, I need to understand more about your people, the Sylvani. You're clearly bioengineered to be part of this ecosystem. Your bioluminescence, your venom. Were you created by the same people who attempted the terraforming? Lyra's expression darkened. Sylvani are first children of Sylvath, she said firmly. We were here before humans. Always. She paused, then added more softly, but our stories tell of the great changing, long ago. The world remade itself, and we changed with it. A previous terraforming attempt. Kale wondered aloud. Or natural evolution influenced by Xylos's unique properties? He made notes on his device. Either way, your biology might be the key to understanding how to counter the withering. How? Lyra asked, moving closer. Your venom, Kale explained. It paralyzes other species, but doesn't affect humans. And my blood affects you in ways no other species does. These biological compatibilities and incompatibilities might help us understand how to neutralize the toxins. Lyra considered this, her luminous patterns shifting in what Kale was beginning to recognize as contemplation. Tomorrow, at the Dying Heart, you will see the poison machines. Then you will know how to end the withering. I hope so, Kale said honestly. At the very least, I should be able to determine if my theory is correct, that it's the abandoned terraforming equipment causing the problem. As night deepened around them, Kale noticed Lyra becoming increasingly restless. Her luminous patterns flickered erratically, and she paced the small confines of their shelter. When she finally settled beside him, he could feel tension radiating from her. You need more, don't you? He asked quietly. My blood. Lyra didn't meet his eyes, but nodded once, sharp and quick. The poison in the air grows stronger. It dims my light. She finally looked at him, her expression a complex mixture of hunger, shame, and determination. But I will not take without permission. I made this oath. Kale considered their situation carefully. They would reach the heart of the withering tomorrow, likely facing the highest concentration of toxins and possibly other dangers. Lyra at full strength would be essential. It's okay, he said, shifting to give her better access to his neck. Take what you need, but try to be mindful of how much. Gratitude flashed across Lyra's features before hunger took over. She moved with predatory grace, positioning herself beside him, one hand coming to rest on his shoulder. Her breath was warm against his skin for a moment before her teeth pierced the now familiar spot on his neck. This time, Kale was fully conscious and attentive to the sensations. The initial pain gave way quickly to that strange, rushing heat that seemed to enhance every sense. Colors intensified. The faint bioluminescence of Lyra's skin became brilliant swirls of blue-green light. The sounds of the forest, even in its dying state, sharpened and clarified. He could hear the crystalline structures outside their shelter shifting and growing with faint tinkling sounds, the distant movement of corrupted wildlife, even the subtle shifting of the dead trees' remaining root system around them. Most disorienting was his sudden awareness of Lyra, not just physically, but in some deeper, almost psychic way. For a brief moment, he felt what she felt, the overwhelming rush as his blood entered her system, the clarity it brought, the temporary abatement of the constant, low-grade pain that the withering inflicted on her body. And beneath that, emotions, determination, fear for her dying world, and something unexpected, a growing fascination with him that went beyond his usefulness as a blood source. When she finally pulled away, they stared at each other in shared shock. The connection lingered briefly before fading, leaving them both breathless. You felt me, Lyra whispered, her pupils still dilated from the effect of his blood. And you felt me, Kale replied, equally stunned. What's happening to us? Lyra raised a hand to his face, her touch tentative, explorative. The old stories speak of deep bonds between Sylvani, sharing of mind and spirit. Her fingers traced the contour of his cheek with wonder. but never with other beings. Kale leaned into her touch, finding it strangely comforting. It must be the repeated exposure, he theorized, his scientific mind automatically seeking explanations even as another part of him simply wanted to experience this new connection. Some chemical interaction between your venom and my blood, creating a temporary neural link. Is it temporary? Lyra asked, her voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. I don't know, Kale admitted. This is entirely new territory. They remained close, neither quite willing to break the lingering connection. Eventually, Lyra spoke again, her voice soft in the darkness. If we stop the withering, what then? You return to your people. The question caught Kale off guard. He hadn't thought much beyond his mission to understand and hopefully halt the ecological disaster. His life on Earth seemed distant now, almost theoretical compared to the immediate reality of Xylos and the woman beside him. I don't know, he answered honestly. My mission was to investigate and report back. But now, he glanced around at the dying forest, then back to Lyra. Now it's more complicated. Lyra nodded, seeming to understand the unspoken implications. She moved away slightly, creating physical distance that somehow felt more significant after their momentary mental connection. We should rest, she said. Tomorrow will bring many dangers. As they settled into uneasy sleep, Kale found himself acutely aware of Lyra's presence nearby. Something fundamental had shifted between them. Prisoner and captor, human and alien, now linked by blood, venom, and a shared determination to save a dying world. Whatever happened to the dying heart tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. Dawn arrived as a subtle lightening of the perpetual gloom that hung over the devastated forest. Kale awoke to find Lyra already alert, her posture tense as she peered out from their shelter. Something changed in the night, she said without turning. The air tastes different. The poison moves. Kale joined her, activating his analyzer. The readings confirmed her assessment. Toxin levels had spiked dramatically overnight, with new chemical signatures appearing that his equipment struggled to identify. The source is becoming more active, he concluded grimly. How much further to the dying heart? We reach it before midday, Lyra replied, gathering her few possessions. But the path will be most dangerous now. Stay close. They set out into a landscape that barely resembled a forest anymore. The ground had transformed into a metallic crust interspersed with jagged crystal formations that grew larger and more complex as they progressed. Dead trees stood like skeletal sentinels, their trunks partially absorbed into the crystalline structures. The air had taken on a thick, oily quality that left a metallic taste on the tongue and made each breath a conscious effort. Lyra moved with extreme caution, testing each step before committing her weight, occasionally using her bone dagger to test the stability of crystallized surfaces. The venom-infused enhancement from the previous night had not fully faded. Her movements remained fluid and her luminous patterns relatively bright against the desolate backdrop. They had been traveling for perhaps 2 hours when Lyra suddenly froze, raising her hand for silence. Kale stopped immediately, straining his senses to detect whatever had alarmed her. Then he heard it, a rhythmic, mechanical grinding sound coming from somewhere ahead. It pulsed with unsettling regularity, accompanied by occasional bursts of higher-pitched whirring. The poison heart speaks, Lyra whispered, her voice tight with tension. It has never been so loud. They proceeded with redoubled caution, following the increasingly loud mechanical sounds. As they crested a small rise, Kale finally saw the source of the withering, and his worst theories were confirmed. In a wide clearing ahead stood the remains of a massive terraforming installation. What had once been a sleek, efficient piece of human engineering had transformed into a nightmarish hybrid of technology and corrupted biology. Crystal formations had grown over and into the structure, connecting with internal machinery that continued to operate despite decades of abandonment. Massive pipes protruded from the central facility, plunging into the ground and releasing periodic bursts of metallic mist into the air. The entire construction pulsed with sickly light, its rhythm synchronized with the grinding sounds they had been following. "The poison nest," Lyra breathed, her voice a mixture of horror and vindication. "The humans left this to kill Sylveth." A primary atmospheric processor, Kale identified, scanning the facility with his equipment. It was designed to gradually alter Xylos's atmosphere to make it more Earth-like, releasing manufactured compounds to catalyze the change. He shook his head in dismay, but it's malfunctioned catastrophically. Instead of releasing the compounds in controlled amounts, it's pumping them out continuously, and they've mutated over time, reacting with Xylos's native biochemistry. "Can it be stopped?" Lyra asked, her eyes fixed on the monstrous hybrid of machine and crystal. "Theoretically, yes," Kale said, analyzing the structure. "It still has a central control system. If we can reach it, I might be able to initiate a shutdown sequence." He hesitated, then added, "But getting there won't be easy, and there's no guarantee the controls still function after all this time and corruption." "We must try," Lyra said firmly, "or Sylveth dies completely." They studied the facility from their vantage point, identifying a possible approach route that offered minimal exposure to the toxic mists and some cover from whatever unforeseen dangers might lurk within. The plan was straightforward but dangerous. Approach the central building, locate the control room, and attempt to shut down the processor permanently. As they prepared to descend toward the facility, Lyra turned to Kale, her expression solemn. "If we fail," she said quietly, "the poison will kill us both. But your death will be slower, more painful. I can give mercy if needed." Kale understood what she was offering, a swift death by venom rather than a prolonged one by toxic exposure. He nodded once, accepting this final piece of their strange partnership. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," he said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. They began their approach, moving from one sheltered position to another, avoiding open spaces where the metallic mist settled most heavily. The closer they got to the facility, the more pronounced the crystal growths became, forming intricate, almost architectural structures that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the central processor. Halfway to the building, they encountered their first major obstacle, a wide area where the ground itself had liquefied into a pool of metallic sludge, bubbling and shifting with apparent sentience. It blocked their planned route completely, extending too far to circumvent easily. "We need another way," Kale murmured, scanning for alternatives. Lyra pointed to a series of crystal formations that extended across the liquid expanse like stepping stones. "There, but they may not hold weight." It was their only viable option. Lyra went first, testing each crystal platform before committing her full weight. The formations held initially, though they vibrated unnervingly with each step. Kale followed carefully, his heavier human frame causing the crystals to creak ominously beneath him. They were nearly across when the facility suddenly emitted a deafening mechanical groan, followed by a massive release of metallic mist from all its vents simultaneously. The ground trembled with the discharge, causing the crystal Kale stood on to shift dramatically. He lost his footing, tumbling sideways toward the bubbling metallic sludge. Lyra reacted with preternatural speed, diving to catch his arm before he could fall fully into the toxic liquid. Even so, his leg plunged briefly into the silvery substance before she could pull him to safety on the far shore. Pain seared through Kale's calf where the liquid had touched him. Even through his protective clothing, the substance had burned instantly to the skin. He bit back a cry as Lyra dragged him further from the edge, behind the shelter of a larger crystal formation. "How bad?" she asked tersely, already examining his leg. Kale winced as she cut away the damaged portion of his suit. The skin beneath was an alarming shade of gray, with metallic threads beginning to spread outward from the point of contact. "It's converting my tissue," he gasped, recognizing the process from his research. The same transformation affecting the wildlife and vegetation. Lyra's expression hardened with determination. Without hesitation, she lowered her mouth to the wound and bit deeply. The pain was excruciating, but different from her previous bites. This time she was not injecting venom, but extracting the corrupted blood and fluid from a wound. She spat repeatedly to the side, the expelled fluid shimmering unnaturally with metallic particles. After several rounds of this, she finally sat back, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Poison is deep," she said grimly. "I removed what I could, but some remains." Kale nodded weakly, his face pale from pain and blood loss. "It bought me time," he acknowledged. "Let's keep moving before more systems activate." Standing was agony, but with Lyra's support, Kale managed to limp forward. The central building loomed closer now, its walls a disturbing fusion of metal plates and organic crystal. An entrance was visible, what had once been a standard airlock, now partially obstructed by crystal growths. They reached the entrance as another mechanical groan reverberated through the structure. Kale worked quickly to bypass the ancient locking mechanism, his hands shaking slightly from pain and urgency. After several tense minutes, the door slid partially open, creating a gap just wide enough for them to squeeze through. Inside, the corruption was even more advanced. What had once been clean, efficient human technology had been overtaken by crystal formations that grew from walls, floor, and ceiling, connecting to computer terminals and control panels in grotesque symbiosis. Dim emergency lighting flickered erratically, supplemented by the bioluminescent pulse of the crystals themselves. "The control center will be central, probably elevated," Kale explained, consulting the analyzer which now displayed a rough schematic of standard terraforming facilities. "We need to find a main corridor or elevator shaft." They navigated through the twisted interior, occasionally forced to detour around areas where corruption had made passages impassable. The air inside was thick with metallic particles that made breathing increasingly difficult. Kale's leg throbbed with each step, the gray discoloration slowly spreading despite Lyra's intervention. Finally, they located what remained of central elevator shaft. The car itself was long gone, but the maintenance ladder along one wall was still intact, though partially crystallized. "I'll go first," Lyra insisted, testing the ladder's strength. "Follow only where I step." The climb was torturous for Kale, his injured leg protesting each movement. Several times, rungs broke beneath their weight, forcing precarious recoveries. By the time they reached what appeared to be the main control level, Kale was drenched in sweat, his breathing labored and face ashen. The control room had suffered the same fate as the rest of the facility. Workstations fused with crystal, view screens cracked, and displaying only static or fractured data. But the central terminal, protected by redundant systems and more robust construction, remained somewhat intact and operational. Kale limped to the terminal, collapsing into the crystallized remains of an operator's chair. His fingers flew across the interface, navigating through corrupted systems and degraded code. "The processor's core programming is still accessible," he reported, hope rising in his voice. "The override systems are corrupted, but I might be able to trigger a manual shutdown by redirecting power from the primary systems." As he worked, Lyra positioned herself at the room's entrance, watching for any signs of danger. The facility seemed to be responding to their presence, its mechanical groans becoming more frequent, the crystal formations pulsing with increased intensity. "Hurry," she urged. "The poison nest knows we are here." "Almost there," Kale muttered, bypassing security protocols and damaged systems. "I just need to—" There! The screen flashed with a confirmation message, and throughout the facility, the mechanical sounds began to change pitch, declining from their previous rhythm to a lower, slower pattern. "It's working," Kale said, relief washing over his face. "The primary systems are beginning to power down." But their victory was premature. As the main systems initiated shutdown, an automated defense protocol activated. Warning lights flashed throughout the control room, and a mechanical voice, distorted by decades of corruption, echoed from hidden speakers. "System compromise detected. Initiating countermeasures. Purge sequence activated." The doors to the control room slammed shut, sealing them inside. Vents opened in the ceiling, releasing a dense metallic fog that began to fill the space rapidly. "No!" Kale's fingers raced across the terminal, trying to abort the purge sequence. It's a failsafe designed to protect the facility from sabotage. Lyra moved to his side, her luminous patterns dimming visibly as the toxic fog descended. "Can you stop it?" "I'm trying," Kale said desperately, but the system isn't recognizing the commands. It's too corrupted. The fog continued to thicken, making visibility and breathing increasingly difficult. Kale felt his lungs burning with each breath, his injured leg now throbbing with intense pain as the metallic contamination spread further through his tissue. Lyra sank to her knees beside him, her movements becoming sluggish. The luminous patterns on her skin flickered weakly, some sections going completely dark. "My light fades," she whispered. "The poison is too strong." Kale abandoned the terminal, dropping to the floor beside her. "There has to be another way," he insisted, though his own strength was failing rapidly. Lyra looked at him, her eyes still bright despite her dimming skin. "One chance remains," she said, her voice barely audible. "Your blood gave me strength before. My venom gave you heightened senses." A full exchange, Kale realized, understanding her intention. Not just a bite, but a true sharing of blood. Lyra nodded weakly. "Our blood together might resist the poison long enough to finish." It was dangerous, potentially fatal for both of them. But with the toxic fog continuing to fill the room and their strength failing rapidly, they had no other options. Lyra used her dagger to make a shallow cut across her palm, then took Kale's hand and did the same. She pressed their bleeding palms together, their blood mingling. Then, with her remaining strength, she leaned forward and sank her teeth into his neck one final time. Not to feed, but to create a direct connection between them. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The familiar rush of heat and heightened senses exploded into something far more intense, a complete merging of perceptions and consciousness. Kale gasped as Lyra's awareness flooded into his mind, bringing with it her intimate knowledge of Xylos, her connection to the living planet, her memories of the forest before the withering began. In return, Lyra received Kale's scientific understanding, his knowledge of the terraforming systems, and his human perspective on their situation. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, they were not two separate beings, but a single consciousness experiencing reality through two bodies. In this merged state, the solution became immediately clear to both of them. The terraforming facility couldn't simply be shut down. Its systems were too corrupted, too integrated with the planet's biology after decades of malfunction. Instead, it needed to be repurposed, its operations reversed to begin extracting the toxins it had released rather than continuing to pump them out. Moving with perfect synchronicity, their bodies weakened, but their shared mind focused and determined. They returned to the terminal. Their fingers moved across the interface in perfect coordination, inputting complex command sequences that neither could have managed alone. Kale's scientific knowledge, combined with Lyra's intuitive understanding of Xylos' biological systems, allowed them to rewrite the facility's core programming, transforming it from an agent of destruction into a tool for healing. As the final command sequence was entered, the facility shuddered violently. The mechanical sounds changed again, shifting from their declining rhythm to a new pattern, smoother, more harmonious. The toxic fog in the control room began to dissipate as the vents that had released it now drew it back in. On the main display, confirmation appeared. System reconfiguration complete. Initiating bioremediation protocols. The merged consciousness of Kale and Lyra registered triumph before the strain of maintaining their connection became too great. The blood bond broke, sending them crashing back into separate awareness. They collapsed to the floor of the control room, physically and mentally exhausted beyond measure. Kale regained consciousness first, his head pounding with the aftereffects of their unprecedented connection. He found Lyra lying beside him, her luminous patterns faint but stable, her breathing shallow but regular. The toxic fog had cleared entirely, replaced by air that, while still metallic tasting, no longer burned with each breath. He struggled to his feet, checking the terminal for confirmation that their intervention had succeeded. The display showed the new protocols functioning as intended. The facility was now processing and neutralizing the toxins it had previously released, beginning the long, slow work of healing the planet. "Lyra," he called softly, kneeling beside her still form. "Lyra, we did it. The dying heart is healing now." Her eyes opened slowly, their green depths clearing as she focused on his face. "I feel it," she whispered. "The poison flow has changed direction." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the contours as if seeing him for the first time. "You remain in me, a shadow of your mind." Kale nodded, experiencing the same lingering connection. "And you and me, we're bonded somehow." They helped each other up, supporting one another as they made their way out of the control room. The facility around them had already begun to change, crystal formations pulsing with different colors, mechanical systems operating with new purpose. Where before it had been pumping toxins outward, now it drew them back, filtering and neutralizing the corruption it had caused. Their escape from the facility was easier than their entry had been. Emergency systems had reset, opening exit routes that had previously been sealed. Outside, the environment appeared unchanged at first glance, still devastated, still corrupt. But subtle signs of transformation were already visible. Crystal formations beginning to reseed, metallic ground deposits breaking down and crumbling. "It will take time," Kale explained as they moved slowly away from the facility. "Years, maybe decades, for the planet to fully recover. But it's begun." They found shelter in a relatively intact section of forest several kilometers from the facility. Kale's injured leg remained partially corrupted, the gray discoloration having spread to his knee, but the progression had stopped with the reprogramming of the facility. Lyra's luminous patterns had stabilized, but remained dimmer than before, evidence of the toll the toxins had taken on her physiology. As night fell, they rested side by side, watching the distant facility continue its new work, visible as pulses of light against the darkness. "What will you do now?" Lyra asked eventually, her voice soft in the darkness. "Return to your people?" Kale considered the question carefully. His mission was technically complete. He had identified the source of the withering and taken action to address it. He could return to Earth, file his report, perhaps lead a team back to study the recovery process. But the thought held little appeal compared to the alternative. "I'd like to stay," he said simply, "to monitor the healing process, document the recovery of the ecosystem." He paused, then added more softly, "and to understand what's happened between us, this bond." Lyra's hand found his in the darkness, their fingers intertwining. "The bond is sacred among Sylvani," she said, "never before shared with an outsider." "Is that what we are now?" Kale asked. "Bonded?" "Yes," Lyra replied without hesitation. "Our blood, our minds connected. Not fully merged as in the poison nest, but linked." Her luminous patterns brightened slightly, reflecting emotional intensity. "I feel you here." She touched her chest, then her temple. "And here." Kale nodded, experiencing the same lingering connection. When he focused, he could sense Lyra's emotions, catch glimpses of her thoughts. It was unlike anything in human experience. Neither telepathy nor emotional empathy exactly, but a deeper awareness of another being's consciousness. "I want to understand it better," he said. "And to help your people, the remaining Sylvani. They deserve to know the withering is being reversed." "They will not welcome you easily," Lyra warned. "Humans brought the poison." "I know," Kale acknowledged. "But one human helped end it, too. With your help." They fell silent, contemplating the path ahead. The bond between them pulsed with unspoken emotions, respect, fascination, the beginnings of something deeper neither was ready to name. 3 months later, the signs of healing had become unmistakable. The metallic crust that had covered large sections of forest floor was breaking down, allowing native vegetation to begin reclaiming the soil. Crystal formations were slowly dissolving, their components reabsorbed into the ecosystem in forms that nourished rather than corrupted. The reprogrammed facility continued its remediation work, drawing in toxins and processing them into harmless or beneficial compounds. Kale had established a small monitoring station near the edge of what had been the most severely affected area. From here, he documented the recovery process, collecting data that would eventually form the basis of a comprehensive report on ecological resilience and remediation. His leg, though permanently marked by faint silver traceries where the corruption had spread, had healed well enough for full mobility. Lyra divided her time between Kale's camp and the remaining Sylvani settlement several days' journey away. Initially suspicious and hostile toward the human they held responsible for generations of suffering, the Sylvani had gradually accepted Kale's presence as Lyra explained his role in reversing the withering. The bond between Kale and Lyra, visible in their synchronized movements, their ability to communicate with minimal words, and the permanent bite mark on his neck that now glowed faintly with the same bioluminescence as Lyra's skin, had eventually convinced even the most skeptical elders that this human was fundamentally different from those who had abandoned the terraforming facility centuries ago. Today, Lyra returned from one such visit to find Kale excited about a new discovery. Without words, she sensed his enthusiasm through their bond before she even entered the shelter. "Look at this," he said, showing her a sample of soil teeming with microscopic organisms. Native bacteria are evolving to process the remaining metallic compounds. The ecosystem is adapting, finding its own solutions. Lyra smiled, her luminous patterns brightening in response to his excitement, a reaction that had become more pronounced as their bond deepened. "Sylvath heals itself," she agreed. "With help. The Sylvani elders have noticed too," she continued, setting down her pack. "The children born this season show stronger light patterns than those before. The dimming is reversing." Kale nodded, having documented similar observations in his research. "The recovery is happening faster than I predicted. At this rate, within a generation, much of the forest could return to its pre-withering state." They moved outside, to the small clearing beside Kale's shelter. Here, where metallic crust had once covered everything, new growth had emerged, delicate shoots of bioluminescent vegetation pushing up through the recovering soil, their light pulsing in harmony with the natural rhythms of Xylos. Lyra knelt to touch one of the new plants, her fingers gentle against its glowing fronds. "When I first found you in the forest," she said, "I thought only of the hunt, of survival." She looked up at him, her expression open and vulnerable in a way it had never been during those early days. "I could not have imagined this." Kale joined her, his hand finding hers among the luminous plants. Their bond hummed between them, conveying emotions too complex for words alone. "Neither could I," he admitted. "I came to study a dying world. Instead, I found a new one." The bite mark on his neck pulsed in time with Lyra's own luminous patterns, a physical manifestation of their unique connection. What had begun as predator and prey, captor and prisoner, had transformed into something unprecedented in the history of either species. Not quite human, not quite Sylvani, but something new like the recovering forest around them, finding balance between what was and what could be. Lyra leaned toward him, her forehead touching his in the intimate gesture of Sylvani-bonded pairs. "Your taste gave me life," she murmured, "and Sylvath a second chance." As the sun set over the healing world of Xylos, the forest around them pulsed with renewed bioluminescence, a symphony of light that spoke of resilience, adaptation, and the unexpected paths to recovery that could emerge from even the most venomous of beginnings.